there is perhaps something that is kind of distantly related to something that was bothering me the last couple of days, and that would be something like the relationship or difference between justified authority, if you want to call it like that, and pure domination or power over someone else, and kind of arbitrary authority.
Yes, that is an interesting topic. It reminds me a little bit about our conversation about sovereignty, but I think still this develops certain aspects of that, or general thoughts about authority deeper. So yes, I could share some thoughts about that subject. I know that Saint Thomas Aquinas, he had a good principle about the limits of authority. So in other words, you have an entity or a figure or a person or group of persons who have authority or jurisdiction over some people, subjects. And this authority is real, it exists, it can be used, and when it's used in accordance with the principles of that authority, they have the legitimacy behind them. It's legitimate and acceptable, or at least legitimate for them to do so. However, there are two limits to that authority that St. Thomas Aquinas points out. The first one is if that authority demands something or commands something that is outside of the competence of that authority. And the second one is if the command of that authority contradicts a command from a higher authority. And that is something that makes sense, I would say. So let's see, examples of the first principle, that you can have something or someone going outside of the competence of that authority. Let's say you have a teacher at school and you are a pupil. The teacher has authority over you. He or she can decide what you're going to do, what tasks you're going to do, what books you're going to read during class. However, the teacher does not have authority to tell you how to spend your free time when you are gone after school, when you no longer are in school. She cannot decide that you are not allowed to watch a specific movie at 8 o'clock in your house, because the teacher's authority is limited to that classroom during those hours. That's the restrictions. So outside of that, that's outside her competence. So yes, that's at least some thoughts about this subject.
Yeah, these are good initial thoughts on this question. So I think we should start by working on a definition of what is legitimate authority and what is illegitimate authority. And I think you have here provided the first important ingredient, that perhaps you can say that every institution or social role has a certain purpose or a certain goal, which it tries to achieve or to provide. And the authority that a person holds comes from them being in this role or in this institution, and thereby kind of the group has collectively in some form or another decided that they should have the task of making sure that this goal or this purpose is reached or is fulfilled. And the authority comes from the fact that they are in this role of trying to achieve this important goal that the community has decided is an important goal. And therefore, the authority of this individual would be, or institution would be, limited to its domain of competence that has something to do with this goal that is the purpose of this institution. And so whenever an authority reaches outside of its domain of competence, then it becomes illegitimate. So I know a good example of this. I think, I don't know where, someone told us that their child was in kindergarten, and the children typically bring a like a small, it's not a lunch, but it's kind of when you make a break at 10 o'clock in the morning and then you eat something small. And so the children bring something to eat. And so this child, her mother gave her a banana to eat at 10 o'clock in the morning. And then the kindergarten teacher said, you shouldn't eat bananas because it's unhealthy. And she kind of called this mother and told her that she was no longer allowed to give her child bananas to eat in kindergarten. And this, for example, seems to me to be that she overstepped her domain of competence, because she is not an expert on nutrition or responsible that the children eat healthy, but she is responsible to kind of take care of them during the day and perhaps teach them some very basic social skills of interacting with other children of the same age, and perhaps how to use a scissor or how to do certain handicraft. But this would be an example of what you have talked about.
Yes, that's a good example where we see, as you say, in this kindergarten situation, we have that teacher intervening in something that is outside of her realm of authority. However, one could point out that there are certain, you might say, extreme situations where the teacher might be allowed to involve. For instance, let's say you have a kindergarten child or a pupil in elementary school who is smoking at the schoolyard, and the teacher sees that. We would say that the teacher is justified in prohibiting that student or pupil from, or at least pupil, to smoke. And if that teacher is aware that the parent is giving him cigarettes and perhaps even encouraging him to smoke at school, then the teacher would seem justified at involving. However, I suppose we could say that, well, in these extreme circumstances, we are talking about something which sort of involves a general duty of human beings to avoid children being seriously harmed. But in your example with the kindergarten and the banana, we see no such scenario. So that would be outside of her competence in that situation. What do you think about this consideration?
Yeah, that's an interesting kind of example that you brought up here. And I think you are correct that there is a different principle at stake here. And this principle seems to be that, and I see that there is perhaps a little bit of a difficulty with distinguishing between the two. That's why it's a good example, because there seems to be a general principle that all, as you said, grown-up adults are in some sense responsible together to keep harm away from all children in society, or all people who cannot yet fully make their own decisions for themselves. And so in that sense, when you see, like, let's say for the sake of argument, we agree that smoking is really unhealthy and is kind of has lasting long-term damage that it does, for example, to a child, then it is kind of a different purpose, and therefore a different source of authority that would give, for example, the same kindergarten teacher a right to intervene in this circumstance, or even to contact the parents. Because you could say, let's say the child were playing with a loaded handgun, then it seems quite clear that any adult bystander should intervene because this is objectively dangerous and can lead to the death of this child or other children or also adults. And so therefore something has to be done about it. And some people, and I'm not quite sure if I would agree, but they would put smoking in a kind of similar category because it will perhaps damage the lung of these children. And then since the lung is still not yet fully developed, it's perhaps even worse. And I'm not an expert on this question, but I think it's a different source, a different purpose, and therefore a different source of authority that is at work here in this example.
Right. Yeah, and also I had this other hypothetical scenario which could also be very significant to examine, and this is the authority of parents. So as you were talking, as you were saying, that authority is about fulfilling a certain purpose. That's very reasonable and true, and we can say, okay, the authority of parents over their children is grounded in the parents having the purpose of taking care of the children and watching out for them and making sure that they do not harm themselves in any way, and raise them to become responsible adult human beings. This purpose is limited to the specific children that the parents have. The parents have jurisdiction over their own children and not over the children of the neighbors, for instance, because they have their own parents. However, when you...
May I just quickly, perhaps you should move a little bit to the left side because the sun is making you look very funny in the video. So
yes, that's a good idea. Okay, now I think it's better.
Yeah, I think it's much better. Yeah, so sorry for interrupting.
No, that's okay. Yeah, it's a little bit unfortunate with all the sunlight, but oh well, I think we'll work okay now.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. So that would therefore be the established order, you could say. Now, you have certain extreme cases where you might be a parent and you might have kids or children of your own. But then let's say you're out in the street in some city and you see a child without any parents, an abandoned child, or simply a lost child, missing child. And that child is wandering around the street. And you see that there's danger because perhaps the child is running out into traffic. That's very dangerous. Then you could say the parent has the authority to intervene, to go to the child, talk to the child, and even, if necessary, physically preventing from running out into cars, for instance. And in that extreme situation, you might be able to obtain a certain extraordinary jurisdiction to take care of the child until the parents are discovered, or until someone else can take care of the child. However, you could say that this authority that parent now has over this child, this stranger that is a child, is not authority that he has insofar as he's a parent, because insofar as he's a parent, he only has authority over his own children. But he gains that extraordinary jurisdiction over this child insofar as he is an adult human being, because that authority that it has in this extreme situation, he would have that regardless of whether he was a parent or not. Just given the fact that he is an adult human being, he can now obtain this jurisdiction. So yeah, we could perhaps say something similar with teachers who see children do very harmful things, that as teacher, insofar they're teachers, they have this limited jurisdiction. But then there are extreme situations where they can obtain jurisdiction by virtue of being adult human beings. And you could say that there is a general authority or potential authority that all adult human beings have that is actualized in extreme circumstances. So perhaps something like this could be said.
Yes, I think this this idea of kind of a temporary or spontaneous jurisdiction or authority is an interesting point that you brought up here, and it's also something that we know, I think, from various examples. So, for example, if there is let's say there is an accident somewhere and a lot of cars kind of pile into each other and they start burning and it's kind of a really dangerous situation. And then typically what happens is that all the bystanders, they kind of stand around and wait basically until some person kind of steps forward and takes the role of a leader just for this temporary and local place and time, and says, okay, you do this, you do that, you call the police, and then this person kind of just steps into this this vacuum where now a leadership role has all of a sudden kind of is required, but there is not yet anybody who fills it. And then some person just assumes this authority for the time being, and again is justified by the purpose of the task that he is trying to accomplish. And then as soon as the danger kind of ceases, then also this role that he inhabited ceases to exist, and he becomes just again a normal person like all the others, and has no longer any authority to tell them what to do or where to go.
That is a very interesting situation as well. We could say that whenever we see a good or an order, a human good or order that really needs care and protection and needs some authority to take care of that good, that legitimate authority automatically arises from the fact that there is a good that needs that authority. And your example is very good, because here we see that this authority just arises spontaneously. It's not like a social contract between all the bystanders to appoint one to become the leader. If someone just chooses to be the leader, then ipso facto, automatically, that person will have authority. And I think this is a good argument against the libertarian criticism or critique of authority, which sort of says that you can only have authority insofar as others consent to you having authority over them. But I would say no, that authority arises from the necessity of there being goods that need authority. So yes, that also is an interesting side note against the libertarians, but yeah.
Yeah, I think I was just thinking as you said this that it would be a critique of the idea that every legitimate authority needs explicit consent, because you could say that through the shared human nature of all the affected people, kind of the authority arises because everybody implicitly agrees in this moment that a person or an authority is needed to take care of this human good, which is now in danger here. And I think also your point is very well, that it's always a human good in some form or another that is and the maintenance or furthering of this human good, which is the purpose of the authority, of the legitimate authority.
Sorry, could you repeat the last sentence?
Yes, that it is always a human good or a collective good, perhaps also, which is the purpose that a legitimate authority that gives a certain authority its legitimacy.
Right, there's a certain good that gives legitimate authority to someone that grounds the legitimacy.
Yes, and the legitimacy is grounded by the fact that this person or institution tries to further this human good.
Right.
Yes, so I think we are getting closer and closer to having a definition here. So let me try to to take it together, and then we can see if something is missing. So we could say that authority always arises from the fact that a person or an institution is furthering a human good or a collective good, and the authority is legitimate insofar as it is furthering that human good. And as you said, there are two limits. One is the competence, which would be defined by just the limits of this human good. And the other would be if there is a higher human good which contradicts this particular human good, and then this would be the same as having a higher authority that contradicts the lower authority.
Right, I suppose you could say that, yes.
And so then we would have now defined what authority is and also what legitimate authority is. And then perhaps we could say that illegitimate authority is kind of occurs whenever someone who has legitimate authority in some area tries to use this authority in another area which is not legitimate for him.
Right, so going out of the competence.
Yes, or contradicting a higher authority.